You are listening to the Central Indiana Sports Report, episode number 209.5. Michelle Garmon previews IU's women in the NCAA Tournament.
You're listening to the Central Indiana Sports Report with your host, Greg Menkels.
Michelle Garmon, welcome back to the Central Indiana Sports Report. We are here to talk some IU women as they head into the NCAA Tournament, Michelle, and give us the breakdown.
Well, before I do that, I first want to congratulate Hamilton Southeastern's Maya Makalasky because she was named Miss Basketball today. And
a future Hoosier.
Yes, a future Hoosier. And you know what was really neat is there was video, both Sydney Parrish and Allie Patberg, former Miss Basketballs themselves. Of course, Sydney from Southeastern, the first of the two.
Patberg from Columbus.
Yes. And both Hoosiers, so they gave shout-out videos to her, which I thought was really neat. So I wanted to congratulate her on the honor and the breakdown for the Hoosiers. Of course, they got placed in a very daunting thing, but at the same time, you know, and I know things are different. Mackenzie Holmes and Sarah Scally aren't there, but neither is Cardosa, who gave the Hoosiers a lot of problems last year in the NC2A. But you know, the IU women came the closest to South Carolina, and they actually I think had Dawn uneasy and a little scared because they thought they were comfortably in the lead. Sydney Parrish got hot, and boom! Next thing you know, IU's back, and it is a ball game.
By the way, I should tell everybody it's Friday at 1:30 on ESPN2.
Yes. I think, you know, everything that you...
In Columbia, South Carolina.
Yes, in Columbia, South Carolina. And they're playing Utah. And, you know, Utah is not a bad team, struggling a little of late. But what I'm getting from Terry is they've had a very good 2 weeks of practice. She's been really pleased. You know, she said, you know, I'm a proponent that a lot of times you go and you play like you practice. And she said, and the team seems to be very confident, very relaxed. I think what really helped is even though they lost to USC in the second game of the Big Ten tournament, you know, I mean, they handled Oregon pretty well. And then they were competed with USC.
Yes, they did.
And they were right in that game. I mean, they really were.
7 minutes left. It was a basket.
And I'll tell you what, if Yarden Garzone can play the way she did in the tournament in the NC2A and carry that over to next year, oh my gosh. Greg, I don't know if you saw any of that game or saw the move she put on when she faked, I don't know if it was Juju out with the behind the back dribble and then pulled up and just drained that three. She can be a beast, and I think, you know, next year. And so I think IU is ready. They've had some tournament success. Yes, Miami of Ohio upset them a couple years ago. You know, Holmes tried to play, was not very effective that game. Lily Meister was young and not ready, and Miami had two, what I want to say, very physical bigs that with Holmes, you know, so they were kind of right for it. But, hey, this year it's been an IU team that has proven, really, they can, when they're on their game, they can play with anybody in the country. And, you know, I don't really think Chloe Moore McNeil or Sydney Parrish are ready to go home. Should be a good game on Friday. This isn't the same Utah team that they were a year ago. I know they beat Notre Dame. That was early in the year. You can't take anything. They struggled a little bit kind of late.
Yes, they did.
I would think because the game is in Columbia, South Carolina, and on the East Coast a little bit, by it being 1:30, it might give Indiana a little bit of an advantage, especially because they had to. We
talked about with Oregon, and it happened.
Well, yes, and especially because they've played those first games of the Big Ten tournament back-to-back days. So being ready to tip off at 1:30 is not going to be a problem for the Hoosiers. You know, and that now, granted, I think Utah is only 2 hours?
They are.
Yeah, so that's 11:30 for them. But I just like this team, and I think these kids, they're going to want Terry to get 20 wins. IU has recorded 20 wins every year she's been at IU, I believe. So they don't want that streak to end. Or they only have 19, and they know they could be better. Terry talked about it. They've had this has not been a normal year for IU. It didn't start out normal because they start out with injuries to Lexi Bargesser and Beaumont, and they didn't have Lene Beaumont the whole year. And I think those two figured heavily into rotation plans and the way they had adjusted their, Terry had made some offensive adjustments. They brought in two transfers that I think it took a little while for Carolyn Striplin and Shashevsky to get IU system. The offensive part's not the hard part, it's the defensive part, because there's a lot of communication. Terry they like to play man, and sometimes they don't switch on screens. Sometimes it's just it's a hard hedge. Sometimes she likes to throw in a little zone looks in there to not let a team, if they feel comfortable, or foul trouble. And that defensive communication was lacking. But in the way with both of them, well, Shea started, but with Carol coming off the bench, a lot of times early in the year, they were on the floor at the same time, and you could tell the defense wasn't as good because they didn't understand the communication and the rotations. By the middle of the season, they were getting it and had gotten it. And I just, I
think they're there.
I do too.
I think this team is going to beat Utah, and I think they might have something for South Carolina.
Yes. Now, the only thing that upset me was the NCAA gave South Carolina a chip on their shoulder. I know somebody called them the two-time defending champions. By the way, they are not the two-time defending champions. 2 years ago, LSU was the champion. And last year, South Carolina won. But
not the same team.
Not the same team. No. And so...
careful with the mic.
Oh, yeah. When they didn't make South Carolina the number 1 overall seed, because truthfully, Greg, I thought South Carolina would be the overall number 1 seed. And, South Carolina would be the number 1 overall seed because of what the schedule, the gauntlet. And I think the reason they aren't is that because of that bad loss they had, and it wasn't a bad loss, it was just a big loss to UConn. Well, but look what they did in the SEC and the SEC tournament to do that gauntlet. I really thought they deserved a number 1 overall seed. I'm still not sure how UCLA gets it when they weren't the Big Ten champions. I know they won the tournament, but they lost to USC twice, and USC is the number 4 overall. I'll tell you, the seeding here's the thing. For IU playing and even playing in South Carolina, large crowds won't bother IU. They're number 2 in the Big Ten and number 4 in the nation in average attendance at over 10,000. They've played in front of a sea of red, whether it's crowds for them or against them. They like big crowds. They went on the road to Iowa this year and beat Iowa. And, they don't mind. They're used to big crowds because they play in front of big crowds. So they won't be scared. They won't be intimidated as far as South Carolina. And Carolyn Striplin, she played at Tennessee before she came here. So she has experience against the Gamecocks.
And they're not going to be outcoached.
No.
As good as Don Staley is, as good as the other coaches in the tournament, they're not going to be outcoached.
No.
Rarely is that going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, maybe only twice have I thought that Terry may have gotten outcoached. And I will say this, in both instances, in a couple of both instances, I think there were some other things going on that her attention was off court. And I don't mean that, and that was part of IU this year. And I'm not going to say, I know what one of the situations is. It has been made public. I could guess it, but I'm not going to be the first one to put it in a public format. They have dealt with some off-court, non-basketball, non-team, not players, non-team, but there are some things that have gone on that have not been normal that they've had to overcome. And but I think in the long run it makes them stronger. I just know that this is the time of year, as an IU fan, and especially a women's fan, more so now that I've been a season ticket holder for 3 years, that you just hate to see it. You hate to know that this is the last. Like last year, you hated to know it's the last game Mackenzie Holmes was playing in an IU uniform. 2 years ago was the last game Grace Berger played in an IU uniform. It's going to be the last game that Sydney Parrish and Chloe Moore McNeil are playing in when they lose. It could be. Knowing every time they take the court now, it could be the last game you see them play, and it's just kind of it's a little bit sad, but I just think at the same time, I love Terry's teams, and what I think is you have a lot of young bloggers out there, and people out there don't understand young people today. You and I probably get it more. Understand just, and you, because you've been around it as a Purdue fan, how vital the team, the culture, the fit in the locker room is so much more important than going out and getting a Derek Queen.
It absolutely is.
I mean, it truly is, because don't get me wrong, he's a strong player. But if it's not a player if he's a guy that doesn't fit your system, is not going to fit what you want in the locker room, I don't care if he is dominant, that's not a good choice. You might win some games, and he might have good stats, but how's it doing for your program? And that's what Terry has done at IU. That's why IU they don't have five-star. She didn't have five-star players. Sydney Parrish is probably the only, I think was considered five-star when she came out of high school.
It's all overrated. All that stuff is overrated. Now, I will say that often the top 20 recruits are often a level above the rest. But other than that, it's who gets the player, who develops the player, who, like Zach Edey was in the 400s. It just happens.
Well, let's look at it this
and
way.
Every kid outside the top 20.
How many? Look at Wisconsin's. Everybody talks about
Wisconsin's a good example.
And they were talking about, and everybody wants
Virginia.
IU home runs. But Wisconsin's had sustained success in the Big Ten, competing every year for Big Ten championships. They've had very few. They're called their program, their system, locker room.
Virginia with
thing.
Bennett.
Yes.
Wright with Villanova.
And even Izzo with Michigan State, he gets a few of them, but he doesn't get it.
Not often.
Here's the thing. I don't want, and the only thing that probably bothered me about Duke and Mike Krzyzewski is in the end they sold out.
I thought so.
Because they sold out to be for the one and dones and just to hopefully compete for titles, but they didn't win a lot of Big Ten or national championships.
It's hard to win championships with just
look
freshmen.
Look what happened with Calipari at Kentucky. After a while, that catches one and done. You don't want to fill a roster of a bunch of 1 or 2 and 1 year or 2 year and done.
To the community, it's just not a good way to run your program.
And in this portal age, why go out and get somebody's going to flash more money at him next year and have him for a year? I mean, because you have to balance your money, because you got to put together and structure a roster that's going to, fit and people that want to stay. And Matt Painter and Terry Morin have recruited kids that want to stay.
Matt Painter was great. He became even better when he decided only to recruit Purdue-type players.
Yes, because he did. We know.
Yeah. He went through a few years of it.
He did. He went through a system where he had guys that didn't fit in his locker room. Crean kind of did that early when trying to rebuild IU's program. He brought in that first class. It was pretty good, but then he brought in some kids. It turned out they really did not fit a little bit, but then they left the program, and then I will say this. That's why, but Terry Morin, and that's why I think IU has success, and I think they'll be good again next year. It's because it's a system. It's a fit. It's a culture. It's a belief. Little hint about Chloe Moore McNeil. I think I've said this before, but we may have new listeners. Her mother died when she was in high school on her 16th birthday. Found out she was going to give up basketball because she felt like she needed to stay and help her, with her young sisters. Her aunt and her dad said, "No, you're not. Your mom would not want you to give up this. You love this." And so when she was going on recruiting visits, what her dad wanted as she went, his wish for her, he wanted her to pick a program that had a strong female coach, leader. Because he felt like with his daughter not having a mother, that's what she needed, even though she has some good aunt, Mm-hmm. He liked Terry Morin, and it's been a great thing. And Terry's been great. I mean, I didn't even know this until Carolyn Peck talked about it on a pregame show that because down in Tennessee, if there were times that Chloe would get to be, worrying about her sisters or something. Now, not during the season, but, preseason when they have workouts and practices in the summer. Terry, and she'd say, "Coach, I think I need to go check on my sisters." And Terry would say, "Okay, go, safe travels. We will see you when you get back." Now, how many coaches are necessarily are going
probably not
to
as
do
many
that.
as should. That's for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, I think Terry,
basketball should not be first.
No. And I think that's one of the reasons Chloe stayed, even when she wasn't. And Terry praises her, and I love it because she says she's as tough as a $6 steak. It's a very neat relationship. And on senior day, I paid a special attention, and the hug that Terry and Chloe's dad exchanged it was a big hug, and he was talking to her, and I firmly believe he was thanking her for the impact she had and for being what he wanted his daughter to have at the college level. So it's great. I think it's great. You rarely hear have players transferred away from IU? Yes. Have they transferred away from Matt Painter? Yes. Not very many of them.
Not many.
And
he expects the entire roster back next year, except for Caleb First, and I think that's what's going to happen. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. Also going to be interesting to see what happens with the IU women.
Yes.
Can't wait. And
watching on Utah, I'll tell you this, especially if Yardy hits her first couple threes, which you could be in for a very special treat in that game.
I just want to say real fast that IU is a 1.5-point favorite, but ESPN Analytics says they have a 42% chance to win the game. So it's as toss-up as it gets.
It is. It is.
Thank you, Michelle, for joining us once again. Look forward to hearing from you about the IU women as they progress through the tournament, hopefully. And thank you, everyone, for listening. If you're interested in the Central Indiana Sports Report continuing to grow and thrive, please share these episodes with your friends and family. The Central Indiana Sports Report is a product of ITG Media, and I love Susie.